Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker, and I'll give you just a few things to let you know what kind of a person she is. After working for a major wireless provider for several years, Nadia Lopez decided to become a New York City teaching fellow. She worked in special education. She worked in an Institute of Math and Science for young women, and she was a resident in a program that was dedicated to developing effective educational leaders and policies. And then she knew exactly what kind of school she wanted to lead. In 2008, Nadia Lopez opened the Mott Hall Bridges Academy in the Brownsville community of Brooklyn, a neighborhood that was known for some of the highest poverty and the crime rates and the lowest literacy and graduation rates in the city. The story of how the school evolved is told with compassion, with candor, and with credibility in her book, The Bridge to Brilliance. Ms. Lopez believes that a teacher must always be an attentive listener. She needs to listen to the young scholars. She needs to listen to the parents. She needs to listen to the people in their neighborhood. She needs to listen to her own heart. She believes that a teacher must never give up on her vision, her goals, her scholars, and never give up on herself. Ms. Lopez believes that teaching is not for everyone, that good teaching is extremely demanding and tiring, and that being a leader of teachers is equally exhausting. Months may pass without an incident that can replenish the energy needed to remain steadfast to purpose. 5 years ago, 5 years after Mott Hall Bridges began, about 5 years, Miss Lopez was almost ready to quit. Then a friend texted her, "Did you see this?" And there was a photo of one of her scholars, Vidal, with a hood pulled over his head walking on the streets in New York. The photographer who posted the photo asked the young man, "Who has influenced you the most in your life?" And without hesitation, he said, "My principal, Miss Lopez." The photographer's blog was known as Humans of New York. And Vidal's photo and short interview eventually logged more than 1 million likes, 24,000 comments, and 145,000 shares. The blog opened unimaginable doors for the Mott Hall Bridges Academy. What a way to replenish the energy needed to remain steadfast of purpose. Please join me in welcoming Vidal's principal, Ms. Lopez.
Well, I don't know what else to say. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes. So I am really, really excited. This is my second time here in Austin, Texas. So I am having a wonderful time. I arrived yesterday after taking about 4 or 5 days of just me time, and I'm sure many of you can appreciate and understand that. I just want to thank everyone in this room for being present. I mean, you could be anywhere, it's summertime, but it's so good to be amongst your colleagues, your friends, to reconnect, to rejuvenate, and you're giving me a dose of inspiration that I truly need. So I wanted to just start off by saying thank you to you. I wrote the book, The Bridge to Brilliance, because I wanted to capture the story of what it's like to be a leader, what it's like to be an educator in the classroom, doing the practice, and being very clear and authentic about the process. But it doesn't come without a story and a journey of who I am and where my passion lies. I'm going to work with this clicker, so I didn't check it out. Am I there yet? Okay. So I learned that teaching begins at home. In this photo, as you can see, is the name Louisa, and hand in hand on the right side is my hand with my grandmother, and on the left side is a picture of my daughter standing next to my mother. I'm right underneath her, and I'm next to my grandmother, my abuelita. My mother is from Guatemala, and my dad is from Honduras. My parents came to this country with the intentions of finding a better life. My grandmother had 6 children, and at the tender age of 33, she became a widow. Now, my grandmother never went to school. She was born in 1917, and she never had an opportunity to go to school. And when my grandfather passed away, my mother learned the hardship of having to leave school, learning a trade, and working in order to support the family. My mother only had a 6th grade education, and my dad in Honduras only had a 9th grade education. And the reason for that is that when his mom passed away, he ended up moving with his sister. And because they lost their papers, it did not show that my father really was supposed to be in 11th grade. They held him back. As tall as he was, as old as he was, they held him back. And for my dad, it was the most embarrassing feeling to be the tallest, the loudest, the most identifiable person in class. So he dropped out, and he became a carpenter by trade. So in this photo, what you would see is generations. You would see the generation of my grandmother did not have the education, but what she did was instill in my mother that you have to learn something. And what my mother instilled in me was the importance of education in order to be liberated. So in New York City, unfortunately, our zip codes impact the quality of education we receive. And my mother, not having wealth, only understood that if I put her in the right school in front of the right teachers, we can break the chain of illiteracy. She will have a chance. She will have her moment to shine. And in the neighborhood that we lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, at the time that I was growing up, not like now where it's gentrified and we have wine bars and restaurants, all the good things that every educator needs. Back then, our community was riddled with violence, gangs. In the middle of the 80s, when I started to attend elementary school, it was the crack era. And so we lived in a lot of fear. The closest school to us was one where children literally failed out of school. Teachers didn't care to go to work, and there was violence ensuing every day. My mother had to make a decision. She heard that the better school was literally 2 blocks away from our house, but it was in another zone by 2 blocks. She had to find someone who would be willing to write her a lease and say that we lived literally across the street from the school. Mr. Brownwell, who was from Jamaica, and my grandfather is from Jamaica, was willing to give my mother a chance that would change the trajectory of my life. I ended up going to PS 93. And there I entered 2nd grade because originally my parents had me in public school, but my dad said, listen, she has to toughen up. She has to know what the real world is like, and we can't keep her sheltered for the rest of her life. That and the fact that private school was costly. And my mother was a nurse's assistant, and my dad was a photographer. And combined, they barely made $40,000 together. So I ended up going to PS 93 where I met Mrs. Peony. She was a tough Italian lady who was no nonsense. And she told my mother she has to read every single day, and I'm going to send you to the teacher store, and you're going to have to buy her extra books. And every single night, she needs to read these chapters. She needs to read these comprehension passages because she has to be the best. My mother, being a second language learner, wasn't going to help me read. She wasn't going to help me with the passages, but she trusted Mrs. Peony and bought me every book that Mrs. Peony had to offer. By third grade, I had Miss Burns. And it seemed like every single teacher in this building had the same expectations. I remember having my first Cabbage Patch party in Miss Burns' room, and right after it was my birthday. And right after she says, "I'm so happy for you, honey. Here's a chapter book that I would like you to read. And by next week, I want a report." By fourth grade, I had Mrs. Veroni. Fifth grade, I had Miss Sykes. And sixth grade, I had Miss O'Leary. By middle school, it was very evident that I was going to have to leave my happy little home. But Mrs. O'Leary, my sixth grade teacher, said to my mom, "We're going to find her the best middle school." And at that time, it used to be junior high school. And she said, "You're going to have to find the place that's going to push her and have the same expectations here." So my mom found a school called Summit Junior High School where there was this woman named Paula Holmes. Paula Holmes stood at 6'2". She was 230 pounds. And she had these bulging eyes. And my mother said, "And that's where you're going." I thought to myself, do you see her? Every single parent was on Miss Paula Holmes' line for Summit Junior High School. But it was a gifted school that only selected 44 kids per year. I would have to beat out thousands of other students in New York City who was fighting for a chance. My mother went to my principal at elementary school, Mr. Tucker, and said, "I need a letter." And he said, "You have to apply." She said, "Sir, I need a letter." She waited every single day after school for Mr. Tucker to write the letter. When he didn't do it, Miss O'Leary, my sixth grade teacher, wrote the letter, gave it to my mother and said, "Tell him to go and sign it." Because see, good teachers do that. Good teachers do that. Mr. Tucker wrote the letter. My mother went to Ms. Holmes and said, "My daughter is exceptional, and I need her in this school. I don't have much to offer, but I'll be the best parent that you'll ever see." Ms. Holmes accepted me into her school. I was one of 44 children. That changed the trajectory of the pathway for my life, because what it told me was, one, you have to fight for what you want. Two, teachers really make the difference. And three, if you're not present, if you don't demand, you will never receive. So fast forward, I opened up Mount Hope Bridges Academy, and it was the summer of 2010. The Department of Education had granted me the opportunity of opening a small middle school that was going to be STEM focused, because I truly believe that science, technology, engineering, and math is something that children, especially of color, need to know that is part of every facet of life. But the funny thing is that I had no kids on my roster. See, what happened was we were a feeder school. A school was supposed to be closing, because in New York City, if a school is failing, they close it out. But unfortunately, due to a court injunction, the NAACP argued the point that they should not be allowed to close a school, but instead try to fix it. As a result of that, all of the children who should have come from the closing school were no longer placed on my roster. You think Austin is hot. Brooklyn, New York, with the heat and the violence, is hotter. And I was forced to walk throughout all of the housing projects to look for kids. This picture you see here was taken in 2010. I literally stood at the corner of Blake and Rockaway with cupcakes, with giveaways, hoping that anyone who passed by with a child who looked like they should be in middle school would sign their kids up. And let me tell you, a lot of people made up some names. And when I thought the day that I was going to open up my school, I would have at least 70 kids, I only had 24. Brownsville, Brooklyn has 80,000 residents. Only 32% of them have a high school diploma. Only 14% actually graduate to get a bachelor's degree. Only 3% have a master's. We have the highest crime in New York City. If you Google it, the first thing that comes up is gangs. They talk about the poverty. They talk about all of the negative aspects of a community that exists in one of the richest cities in the world. When it comes to discipline, that's the only time parents show up. Your child is in trouble, you need to make a phone call, they're there. On any given day, our PTA involvement, out of 200 scholars that we have now, there's only 6. In order to make a quorum, we need 7. So we never have a quorum, okay? $11,000 is the average income, and that's in the housing development. So you think about it. How many of you in this room could actually survive off of $11,000? And the average family in Brownsville consists of 4 in one household. Let me explain to you. I have parents who are under 30 with 6 children, making less than $11,000 a year. So people rarely venture out of Brownsville. Although we have a train, although we have buses that is near the school, near their community, they never leave. So here I am, opening up the school, and I decided I was going to have a ribbon cutting ceremony. Everyone thought I was crazy. I had my mom go to the same place that Project Runway moved fashion. I was like, Mom, you need to find it. Let's Google it. You need to find it. I know they have a purple ribbon there. My mother was like, you want a purple ribbon? Shouldn't it be red? I said, I want purple because I want them to know that I mean business. I am intentional with my planning. And so my mama went and found me a purple ribbon. And I made sure that the side of our building had the name of our school. Because in New York City, most of our schools go by numbers. And I refuse to go by a number because our children are taught that they're not good enough by the numbers. When they're incarcerated, they're given a number and their names are taken away. When they were enslaved, they were given a number. So we're going to call this school Mott Hall Bridges Academy. And the reason why we're going to do that is because we are all connected to succeed. And when they stand up, they're going to call themselves scholars, not students, because they need to be reminded that every single day that they wake up, every single place that they venture to, it's a learning experience. And so I was intentional about that. And I was intentional about the colors black and purple because I wanted my children to know that they are descendants of greatness. And that every single day that they get dressed, they are walking into a place that's going to continue their legacy of greatness. So as I told you the day I opened up the school, we only had 24 children enrolled. 100% were Black and Latino. 100% were at free or reduced lunch. 56% of my scholars had an IEP. Those are the children that were diagnosed. I'm gonna just let you know, 100% honestly needed some type of support services. But you know the stigma when it comes to special education. Parents refuse to say yes, not understanding that it's not a place, it is a service. Not understanding that we are here to support their children so that they can be exceptional. So there was a fight. And most of the children who came to our school was simply because no other school wanted them. And the parents refused to put them in what we call District 75, which is one of the most restrictive environments for children with special needs. So they figured, oh, it's a new school and it's small, we'll put them there. But when I share with you the challenges, the school became a challenge. 100% of my scholars were on a kindergarten to third grade reading and math level. The average attendance for children were at 47%. So let me ask you a question. If you didn't show up to work, would you still have a job? When I saw that children could be absent for at least 50 days and late for 120 days, I thought to myself, we are failing children. And we are just passing the buck. So the buck is about to stop right here. We had 4 teachers, 1 dean, no guidance counselor. That was me. I was the guidance counselor, I was the social worker, I was the preacher, I was the psychologist, I was the cook, I was everybody to everything and everyone in that building and everyone outside of the building. So I never slept. I got to work at 6:30. I left every day at midnight. My custodian was like, Miss Lopez, Miss Lopez, Miss Lopez. I was like, we have work to do. Can we come back tomorrow? I would often get locked in my building after church. I would literally go pray, walk into my building. My custodian would leave me in there until about 6 o'clock every night on a Sunday because the work simply could not get done during the week. So here were my major challenges. I just told you all the great things about Brownsville, and the people who showed up wanting a job were those who were the least qualified. It was the teachers who were brand new. It was the teachers that other schools said, you can't stay here. It was the adults who did not believe in children but wanted another place to stay, and those who felt like, I want to be an administrator. I've only been working for 2 years. I got the talent. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? And so it was a hardship having people to understand that the circumstances that these children were under was not their choice, but it was our responsibility to disrupt what had been done to them. We lost $250,000 the first year. I was blamed for not getting enough kids in the hottest summer, for not finding enough kids in a community that had already feared people coming in and taking over and not asking or respecting their needs. So with $250,000 taken out of my budget, I couldn't get books that I needed. I couldn't get the technology I needed. I couldn't get the professional development that I needed. I couldn't find the support that I needed. It was very clear that if I didn't get it together, that the school was going to close without even having opened its doors the first 3 months. There were no models of success in our community because every school was struggling. And when it comes down to New York City and how we share spaces, we are co-located. So we have 2 other schools in our building. It was a fight for territory that we didn't own, territory that said that your children didn't belong. And so every single day I just had to fight for children to have a voice. Who we become can easily be influenced by the things that we constantly see. This is a crane set up by NYPD in New York City. There are several cranes throughout Brownsville. It oversees the community. There's cameras in there, there's a police officer in there, and there's often like these big auto buses that are stationed at different corners. My scholars see this every single day. So when I would ask the question, tell me about Brownsville. Tell me about your community. Give me the words that describe it. Give me some characteristics. The first thing my scholars would say is rapists, drug addicts, guns, violence, and death. These are 11-year-olds. These are 12-year-olds. And some of my scholars were 15 years old in the 6th grade. I would often sit with my young men and ask them, so tell me about what your aspirations look like. And they would honestly say to me, I don't even know if I'm going to live past 6 months. To hear a child say that and own that is a problem. In Brownsville alone, we're only 1.8 miles in radius of size, and there are more than 36 gangs. Children are recruited in 4th and 5th grade. What kind of life is that for a child? So I had a vision. Despite all of this, I still had a vision. And my vision was very clear that children in my school would be able to take over this world. And that they will be globally competitive. That we would find passionate teachers, those who would understand the dynamics of the community and be present and want more for our children. We would create a culture that said our children were brilliant and the community they came from was a place of brilliance. We would also remind parents of what their purpose is in the community and have a stake in our school. We would develop partnerships that would allow our scholars access and opportunities for them to see beyond the landscape of the community that they were in, and that we would also become the model of success. I was pretty ambitious, right? But I told you, I came from a grandparent who didn't read or write, who lived in a country that was poor. So I was going to create something out of nothing. And I was going to have this vision, and I was going to work hard at it. So here's a picture of my staff. And we, unfortunately, standardized testing is something that is part of our daily living. So we wear Army fatigue shirts during testing because we want people to know, especially our scholars, that it's a fight. It is a fight. But we fight together. And so it is my belief that in every great school, there are a community of adults who are willing to love, nurture, and empower our children. So when I look into this room, that's what I see. I see the possibilities of the future because you all are the influencers. Collaboration is always key. My staff, we created a culture where you don't really need me. You're a team. You work with each other, you solve problems, you show up, you ask questions, and at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's not about us being caught in our feelings. It is really about what it is we're supposed to do, which is liberate children through education, because that's the most powerful tool that we have to give. It's important that we are present and we give our scholars time. When you come from a household where your parent can barely read or write, they are not able to sit with their own children and be present and empower them to know that they can be greater. So my staff sits. They take time, whether it's during lunch, whether it's after school, whether it's on the weekend, whether it's during class time, to make sure that every scholar feels like they count. I chose to include this picture here, and the quote that I use is, "Every child has their own unique story. Listen so that they feel that they can be heard." This is Ethan. Ethan is one of my babies. Well, like all of them are my babies, but Ethan is one of my babies. When Ethan first came in, he wasn't a nice person. I'll just say that. He was difficult. And Ethan came to school every single day late. If Ethan came to school at 8:30, he was early. His normal time was about 9:30. He stood out because he had this big afro. And I said to him, can you try to get here on time? And he was like, I just be really tired, Miss Lopez. And I'm like, Ethan, you don't really have a job but to come to school. And he was like, I know. So Ethan had to promise that every single day he would come sit with me after school so we could just talk. And I would listen to teachers always complain about Ethan and how he didn't care, like he didn't want it. And what I found out is that Ethan's mother died of cancer. And that his dad worked 2 jobs. And that he had a stepmother that he really, really didn't like. And so Ethan would stay up late because that was the time that his stepmom would be asleep and his dad would be at work, and he would just watch TV. And so it's not that he didn't want to be at school. It's just that when he was at home, he just didn't feel like he mattered. And so I eventually asked Ethan's dad to come to the school, who never, ever came to the school, not for parent-teachers conferences, not for PTA meetings. And when I called him, he sat in my office and I said, your son is hurting. And he was like, nah, Ethan's all right, he's okay. I said, no, he's hurting. Your wife died and you never asked him if he was okay. You haven't spoken to him. He was like, but I'm okay. I said, it's not about you, sir. I can't teach him because he's hurting. I can't demand of him more because he's hurting and he thinks that you're not paying attention. So as long as you don't pay attention, he's not going to pay attention. So we got to fix this. The dad sat and he cried in my office. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever asked him how he was doing. No one had ever shown a sign of caring. In that one moment, it turned around the dynamics of their relationship. Ethan came to school every day on time. Ethan was the first person when we were going to Harvard. The trip started at 5:30. Ethan was there at 4:40. He didn't want to miss the bus. He was like, I'm not missing this, Miss Lopez. I deserve to go to Harvard. I said, sure you do, Ethan. Sure you do. In that photo, Ethan and I would read every single day together. And now he's in high school, going into his 3rd year. Each one teach one. So every adult in our school, their voices count. These are my paraprofessionals. And one thing about paras is they're often not respected depending on where they're at. They get to sit in classes and become another student. Just sitting. And I'm like, my budget doesn't allow for just sitting, honey. You gotta work. So I remember doing an activity with my special needs scholars, with my general ed teachers, my special ed teachers, and my paraprofessionals. And I named one of the scholars and I put his name on the board and I said to the general ed teachers, I said, tell me something about this scholar, go. And between the special ed teacher and the general ed teacher, I heard difficult, defiant, lacks comprehension, struggles, distracted, everything that I could hear that wasn't positive. I said, he's this all day, every day? Yes. So I looked to the paraprofessionals and I said, describe this scholar. Same scholar, loves praise, takes his time, struggles with understanding, but just needs additional time, helpful to others, wants to go out of his way to please people, can sometimes be reserved, gets frustrated when not listened to. And when I put the differences between what the para said and the teacher said, I said, you both are in the same room. What happened? See, the difference is that the paraprofessionals are with the scholars all day, every day. So they know which teachers work well with them and which teachers don't. They know what they do best in. They know how they learn better in every single class. My question is, have you asked them? And they said, you know what? I didn't even think about it. I said, but that's what you're expected to do. They're just as important in the classroom. They are teachers as well. They're educators. Their titles may be different, but if we take away all of our titles, our job is to make sure our children are educated. You don't need a title for that. So now I have a paraprofessional who's a lead para. She sits on my cabinet team. She gets feedback, she gives feedback. And she's designing professional development for her colleagues. Because all of us are accountable for children. The integration of technology. I love it, and sometimes I hate it. It's nothing like being in a classroom and the technology doesn't work, and you're sitting there like, so we're gonna figure this out, right? But for my scholars who are special needs, technology is really, really important because it gives them another way, a pathway of accessing information. But it also gives teachers an opportunity to find different ways of grouping kids and making sure that they're learning and that when they're home, they have a different way of seeing how technology can be used, not just for Facebook and Instagram, but for educational purposes. It's so important that we show and tell. I used to tell my teachers, why are you hugging the board so much? Like you're hugging it. Let the kids go up to the board with you and show you what it is that they can do. There's nothing worse than being in a classroom where you're talking all day, and then when they take a quiz or do the homework, you say, I don't know why they didn't get it right, because you didn't pay attention to where they were going to go wrong. So let them get up there and be a teacher themselves. Scholars having voice. You know, it's nothing like telling my scholars, y'all are going to dress up tomorrow, right? Because they have to wear uniform every single day. So it just tickles me to see what they're going to wear outside of their uniforms and stand up. And they take such pride and ownership of their learning. And in this particular class, my scholar, Aaliyah, who is always sassy, are you coming to see me present? Because I have some things to say. I said, I'll be there. She made sure she came to my office 2 minutes before and was like, I'll wait because I know you, sometimes you get caught up. I don't want anybody talking to you, so I'm going to wait for you. I'm going to walk you to the classroom. I said, okay, Aaliyah. And she sat me right, as you can see, I'm right front and center. And I was like, Aaliyah, can you take your hand off your hip? She was like, not right now, Ms. Lopez. I'm in the middle of my speaking. I said, okay. Right? And so with all of that work, this was me during that time of, I don't want to do this anymore. So here's the thing that no one told me when I got into education, like how hard it was. I did not realize that Miss Paoni, Miss O'Leary, Miss Burns, Miss Holmes, every single teacher that had impacted me was giving of themselves in such a way that was selfless. I did not understand until I got into education the fact that no one in your house will ever truly get it. Why do you care so much? Why are you always at work? Why are you always buying supplies? Don't they have any in that school? Why are you always talking about these kids? Why? And there were days that I asked myself, why? I did start off working at Verizon, right? But before I got to Verizon, I actually went to school to be a nurse. And I shared with you all that my mother was a nurse's assistant. And so when I went to Wagner College, I was trying to fulfill my mom's dream. She told me that she wanted me to be a boss, not have to be someone who takes direction to feel less than, to be a second-class citizen at work. She said, don't be like me. I want you to be better. So I love every aspect of nursing, the holistic part about learning about individuals, understanding beyond the diagnoses, right? Understanding the person, getting to know who they are. But nursing wasn't my calling. The skills I learned from nursing was important. The active listening, seeing people for who they are, loving them beyond their illnesses. But to do it every single day, to do it on a nursing floor, to do the nursing notes, to wear the white outfit, I wasn't there for that. I was just like, this isn't going to be me. And after my pinning ceremony, I broke my mom's heart. It was the hardest thing I could ever do by telling her, so I know that you want me to be a nurse, but I'm going to go work for the phone company. And she was just like, I'm sorry, what happened? Right? And I was like, yeah, Ma, I don't, this is not going to work. And first she was like, you know how much money I spent? And then she was just like, phone company, why did you go to school? Like, you could have not. I said, Mom, so listen, right? It's a win-win situation here. I get benefits. I get to go back to school and figure out what I want to do and not have to pay for it. And I don't get to kill anyone if I make the wrong mistake. The worst thing that can happen is someone's phones get turned off. I can live with that, right? And my mom was like, what do I tell my friends? What do I tell my family? And I don't know that maybe some people in here don't know what that feels like, but you know when your parents have expectations and you want to make them proud and you make a decision to make them happy, but it's not what makes you happy? I had to figure it out. And so when I had my own daughter, I figured it out. I figured out that the greatest influence in my life was an educator. And what my mother had fought for was something that I was willing to fight for, that I was willing to die for, and that was education. And so on those lonely nights, being in my office with my head down, asking myself why, I remember that my scholars don't have the privilege of having a parent who's willing to find a school in another district. I remember that they don't have a grandmother who may not have been educated, but made sure that when her children had the opportunity of leaving a country for a better life, she let them go. And I remember that with my own child, she has someone who loves her, who's willing to fight, so this is my responsibility. But leadership can be one of the loneliest places to be, because no one ever understands what you put into the work. And so behind closed doors, when I am crying and I'm on the floor, it is because I know if I don't do it, who else will? So, with the money that we raised from Humans of New York, which was actually $1.4 million, ooh, yes. That was from 50,000 people who believed in the vision, right? 50,000 people who said yes. Not my politicians, not the Department of Education, Someone believed that children of color in a community that had been marginalized deserved to see another landscape and understand that their feet should be planted on the places that they should go. And it's not to say that every child is going to end up in Harvard, but I want them to be better than me, to know that you should never think that there's a place that you can't go. And so they get to go every single year. Every summer, we get to have summer exploration classes for 5 weeks from 8:30 to 3 o'clock, Monday through Friday, so that their parents have somewhere to place them, that they're safe, and we're closing the achievement gap. I put this picture in here because I want you to know that you all have superpowers. You do. This is my superpower. This is my little Morris. Morris was one of the most difficult children, so difficult that I told his parents in 7th grade, oh, he can't come back unless you come back with him. They thought I was joking. I was like, he can't be in the classroom? No. So how are we going to run this schedule? We created a schedule. His mother had to sit with him. His dad had to sit with him. And if you can't show up, he can't show up. This is how we're going to work it. It is unfair to adults to have to deal with children who don't want to be here. And it's unfair for you to think that we are babysitters. Absolutely not. And his parents tried to call the superintendent. They tried to call the Department of Education. I was like, well, then somebody needs to come in here and sit with Morris because we're not going to do it. I can't sacrifice other children because you all don't have control over him. No. So after being embarrassed and having to sit in class every single day, I know they got their lives together and so did Morris. And by 8th grade, he was a pleasant child. But of course, when he walked across the stage, he had to have his shades on because he said, Miss Lopez, I made it. Right? And so we're at 100% graduation rate now, right? And these tears of joy is because there's never going to be a Mount Hall Bridges Academy for these scholars. When they get to high school, we always hope and pray, and we just want to love them up so that they know when they get to high school, you better advocate for yourself and tell adults you are here to learn, and it's not time for them to play with you because you need to go to college or get a career that's going to sustain you and your family, and $11,000 will never be your answer. So this is the legacy. They used to be shorter than me. As you can see, I have on the purple pants. I'm shorter than them. These are part of the scholars who receive money from scholarships that's provided from that $1.4 million. In the past 2 years, we were able to give away $120,000 so that our scholars could go to college. Because the one thing that they can't do when they get to college is sustain themselves financially, right? So we want to make sure when they get there, they're there. And here's my why. My why is very simple. I know I have like a minute, but I'm going to take this time not to break down and explain to you my why. I never shared this story, so just bear with me. In 2015, I was notified that we would go see the president. My grandmother was dying. I walked into my house to tell my mother, Ma, I gotta go, I'm going to see the president. And there was tears in her eyes, and she said to me, I said to her, what's wrong? She said, your abuela. She's dying. And I immediately said, I can't go. She sobered up real fast. She said, no, you gotta go. You gotta go. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If she goes, you will know that you've done all that you can and you've made her proud. So I drove 4 hours crying. Brandon was standing next to me. Brandon was sitting next to me. He said, I'll drive the car. I said, no, if you drive, I'll be boo-hooing louder than everybody. So just let me drive, Brandon. When we got to the Oval Office, I remember praying. Brandon said to me, you always pray, let's pray. And I prayed, not for the moment, but I just needed my grandmother to just hold on for me to get through this moment. My why became, in my lifetime, in this child's lifetime, he would get to know that there's no place he cannot go. That we don't have to wonder whether or not a person of color could ever make it to the highest office in this world. That my grandmother, who I didn't get to tell you, was blind. Blind because she was epileptic, she took medication that ultimately led her to become blind, and no one could tell until it was too late, irreversible. My grandmother had never seen my face. But she knew my voice, and she was proud of every accomplishment. Education has the power of liberating children, transforming communities, and giving us what we deserve. It's our birthright. And my grandmother passed away 4 days after. I was able to speak to her and tell her, Abuelita, I am your legacy now. You can let go. You've done all you can, and I thank you. Now, I didn't mean to make this a tear-jerking moment, but I want you to know how important your work is. I want you to know that the Vidals of the world, the ones who may or may not come back and say thank you, we do this for this moment, to know that one day our children, the ones that we raise in our classes from 8 to 3, the ones that we cry over, that we don't spend enough time with our own families, the thank yous come in these small moments. And so I want you to be the bridge, right? And remember that every single day, that's who you are. Mentor others. That's what this organization is about. You join it because you want to be part of your beautiful tribe, the one who shares information, the one that you get to come together, laugh, talk about your families, and be reminded of why you do this work. Remain passionate. We live in strange times right now. Our education system really doesn't have a vision, but each and every one of you does. To those who have retired, I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to that day. But I encourage you. The younger generation still needs to see you. They need to hear you. They need you to be their Miss Peony, feisty and in their faces, reminding them of why they do this work. Those who are younger, invest in yourself. You're not going to learn by the standards of conventions of education. Build your craft. It's a beautiful craft. And lastly, remember your purpose. So I want you, with your tear-filled eyes, to find a neighbor. Find anyone in the room. Just turn to a neighbor. I don't see everybody turning to a neighbor. I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, you're awesome. I didn't finish. Wait a minute. Wait. Everybody's like, yes, you're awesome. Wait. We're going to start over. So we're going to start again. Pay attention to the teacher. Okay. Neighbor, you are awesome. You've been called to do an exceptional job with exceptional children. You are everything this world needs. Phenomenal, brilliant, and awesome. Now I'm going to let you turn to a new neighbor. nothing like teachers in the room. Then they start talking to each other. New neighbor. She made us cry. But it's all good. You are beautiful. You are a light. You are a bridge. Now give your neighbor a hug. I am way over my time. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to share my story. Thank you so much. Thank you.